Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, my partner in crime, as always, Vasili, Gianarakos. Vasili, what's up, brother?
Not much, Yariv. We're looking, at the Flyers and what they've been doing lately. Very successful road trip that they just came off of, despite the OT loss in Nashville. There's just a lot of topics to discuss, and I think one thing that has been interesting throughout the season is that the Flyers have really outperformed what many pundits and what a lot of people expected of them. And for regular listeners of the show, this is about where we had them, right? Like right on the bubble, being competitive in almost every game and essentially fighting for a playoff spot. So I just think, it's interesting to see that that's actually come true here and the ways that it's happening. How you doing, buddy?
Doing well, man. Really well said. Also leading with defense, which is something we talked a lot about. Yeah, we pretty much nailed it. I mean, not to toot our own horns like in this recording, but I mean, so far we've kind of nailed the direction of this team. And I know people who listen to this podcast. I'm sure you guys listen to other podcasts and other pundits out there. Yeah, we were arguing against what they were saying, and we were saying we have no idea what the hell they're talking about. And this was why. Because again, people want to call us biased or whatever. We're really not. We just say things as we see them. So I'm proud of that. Before we get started, let's first remind everybody, please like, subscribe, share our content out. It's a humongous help to us. Again, hit the bell for notifications to make sure you get notified when this goes out. Usually goes out at nighttime, probably. Now that I got new hardware, it goes out a little bit earlier, before midnight. But yeah, usually goes out pretty quickly. And then also just go to Spotify and iTunes. Give us a follow there, and if you can give us a ratings on iTunes, that would also be really helpful as well. Help drive our audio listens as well for you audio listeners. So again, thank you guys all for all the support, and the last episode with Steve did as well as we were hoping it was going to do. It's absolutely crushing it right now. Steve is a gem. I love that man. We both love him. And we will have him back on here much more in the future. Like, he pretty much gives us the option to have him on as much as we want. So I just don't want to overuse his time too much. But glad everybody's enjoying it. We love recording with him. So it was an awesome episode. And also a shout out to our sponsor, Jim's Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's. You can order their cheesesteaks on DoorDash right now. All right, dude. Let's get into it. So as of right now, over the past 5 games, the Flyers have points in all 5 games. They've won 4 of the last 5. It's been pretty exciting. They beat the Avs recently in a pretty. It's definitely not a dominant win, but it was dominant on the scoreboard in a 5-2 win. Then they lose a nail biter to the Nashville Predator. This is another game where they were the better team and didn't come out with the 2 points. I would say half of their losses this year pretty much fall under that category, which is almost a shame because their record could even be better than what it is right now. And it sucks to lose out on that. But overall, the Flyers have definitely gotten the NHL's attention. You can hear it all around, though. I did find it interesting. I was re-listening to or I was watching the highlights from the Avs game on YouTube, and it was the Avs. It was the broadcasters out of Denver. And as they were calling us a bubble playoff team, Travis Sanheim is like literally roofing a shot top shelf on their team for a 3-1 lead. And it does feel like over the past few games, the league has kind of changed its tune. A lot of the fan bases have changed their tune. We were kind of talking about the tank crew on here. And how, I know Elliot Friedman has even said something that, there was a lot of people who didn't believe in this team. But as you guys can see, there's just a lot more talent here than people anticipated. And John Tortorella is a great coach, and he's done a great job here leading this team and changing the culture. And I've been saying it for the past few years. A lot of the games that the Flyers were losing over the past several years were all due to process. And people didn't agree with me. They thought it was a talent thing. And I didn't think. I don't think it's a talent thing to be competitive. It's a talent thing to win a championship. And that's where the Flyers are not necessarily built to win a championship, but they are built to be competitive. Um, what do you think, Vasily? What do you think over the past, I mean, we could just talk about the two games themselves, but what do you think about just this, change of heart from people watching the Flyers?
It's not surprising that initially with the team doing well, you didn't have kind of the national media really taking it seriously up until this point, just because the sample size is small.
We'll
So
go
they're not
back
gonna.
to sorry to cut you off, but we'll go back to the John Buccigross. Oh, they're just gonna tank again.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, no national media pundit is going to want to put their opinion out of the line and come out of left field and be like, oh, this team that pretty much everybody thought is going to be a bottom five team actually isn't a bottom five team. They're a playoff team, right? So it's not unexpected in terms of my opinion on it, just like with the way that they're reacting. Now we're about, a quarter way through after the Avs and the Nashville game here. It only makes sense that we are kind of seeing a shift there. Like I think over their last 15 games, the Flyers are 10-3-2. So, after out of a 30 possible points, they have 22 of 30 points in the last 15 games. Like that's not too shabby at all. That's the makings of a really good team. So when you look at it that way, I don't think it's surprising they're starting to get that type of recognition because it's not just a concentrated sample, right? It's beyond that. And I think beating the Avs is actually really something that cements them just as being a good team in general this season. I think people are kind of giving into that thought because you look at some of their wins. I mean, you could say that it's not over some of the top echelon teams in the league. Although they beat Vegas before, they beat LA before, they lose to the Rangers. So beating the Avs kind of shows, okay, they're not only just beating these top tier teams on one-off situations, they're doing it more often than one time, right? And I think beating a team like the Avalanche, who are one of the best teams in the Western Conference, in the way that they did, it kind of throws that opinion out there into the stratosphere, and it lets kind of national media kind of attach onto that and say, hey, well, if you look at the Flyers and their process and everything that they're doing, they actually are a really good team. And I mean, if you look at the underlying metrics of it all, right, they are playing really well, right? Like they're top 5 in the league in expected goal share. I believe they're 4th in the league with a 53% or so. Actually, let's check it out here. So yeah, they're actually 4th in the league, 53.54% in expected goals share. In Corsi percentage, they're 13th in the league. So all these metrics that kind of point to underlying process and the team playing well. The Flyers are in the either top 5 of the league or upper echelon in the league here. And like you said, Yariv, I think a lot of it is just goals against and being able to play strong defense, right? Like if you look at the way the Flyers are defending right now, they're one of the best defensive teams in the league. They're one of the stingiest defensive teams. Like they've only allowed 2.71 goals against per game to this point. So that just shows that places them actually 25th in the league in that metric. So the way the NHL kind of lays it out is they have the team giving up the most goals as first, and then they go down the list. So the Flyers being, 25th there, essentially are 7th best in terms of goals they're allowing per game. So the defense is a huge aspect of it. And even if you look at their goal differential in general, right? Like 83 goals for this season, 76 goals against. That's a +7 positive goal differential. That's something that they were not putting up last season. They had a substantially negative differential. So it just shows, right, that the team in all facets is finding ways to win. And I think if you look at the way they're playing, like, it's not just one line or one sect of the team or one specific player, right? It's kind of a score by committee, defend by committee team right now. And I think for the Flyers and just the talent that they have, that's the way that they're going to have to play to win. And I mean, they've really bought into John Tortorella's system here, just in terms of how they're all back checking. They're all committed to playing, a defense first game and then that contributing into offense. And then obviously just the odd man rushes. Like they are a team that really can capitalize on those rushes and with their speed. Like if you look at even their 2 goals from last night, those are all odd man rush goals that they score. Like the Couturier goal is started on an odd man rush. Literally, Couturier starts the play out of his own end, makes a nice defensive play, makes a heads up pass in the neutral zone, and then is able to score and finish off the goal like with some patience and go 5-hole on Cerro. So there's just a ton of ways that they're doing it right now, but it's all like with the team being on the same page and offense and defense by committee. And I think that's a recipe for success because it's not just, like I said, one person and one hot streak kind of contributing to the success. It's multiple different things at one time. So for me, that bodes well just in being able to continue it. Like obviously there's going to be lulls and there's going to be situations where they have dips in their play. And that's kind of where I'm going to be interested to see how they respond. But even in prior stretches where they've lost a couple in a row, like we've seen the team come back and have, strong stretches. And really since the San Jose game, they haven't had an extended period of time here where they've really gone on like a major losing streak or lost a lot of games. And one stat that I thought was really, really interesting that they brought up on the broadcast just before I hand it over to you here again, Yariv, is the Flyers in 12 straight road games now have actually allowed 3 or less goals. And that ties the 1973-74 team who won the Stanley Cup. So that's a crazy stat. And for them to be able to do something like that with this team that kind of nobody thought even had a chance of challenging for a playoff spot. It just speaks to how well they're playing to tie that championship winning team for goals allowed on the road consecutively here.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I talked about all the time about all these people wanting to trade guys at a loss and all this stuff. It's like, first you got to get the most out of what you have, right? Before you can declare any, like when everyone is shit in the bed, how do you know what is the problem? Now, when you can see that the team is playing well, and we'll talk about some of these, some of the players are doing well and some of the players maybe we could see more out of. But, you can identify where you really need to improve and where it's not just a team issue. And, those numbers that you're talking about, like that Stanley Cup tying record, Stanley Cup team tying record, like that's crazy, right? Like, that means you're playing a level of defense as a unit, as a team that we quite frankly have not seen in a very long time. And that did not require going out and getting the best players in the league to do that. That is done through team play. And it also shows the Flyers were more talented than people really wanted to give them credit for. And when the Flyers did go on that losing streak last year, everyone loves to ignore the fact that they were severely injured at that time and probably wouldn't have gone on a 10-game losing streak if that didn't happen, right? Again, all of these things kind of fell into place where we ended up with Matvei Michkov, a generational talent, which, again, I don't think people are really aware of enough. We just did a podcast on this, but I don't think people are really aware of it. Like I was listening to another podcast the other day. Again, I'll leave names out of this. And again, the podcaster himself thought very highly of it, but he's like, is Matvei Michkov gonna be like a superstar player? He's like, I don't know. He's like, I believe he is, but I don't know. Why do you not know? What is the hesitation with Michkov? It's like there's always like this air of like, well, it's here in Philly and it's just not gonna work out for us, or there's always that hint it's not gonna work out for us. But what is he doing that would make you doubt him, but not doubt Connor Bedard? Like nobody doubted what Connor Bedard is doing, and he's living up to those expectations. And his team's not very good. Imagine what kind of numbers you could put up on a good team. Imagine Michkov comes over here and we're playing the way we are. What kind of rookie season is he going to have? Talking about potential 100-point rookie season. Like, that's what I see right now. Again, we haven't been off, but you add a player of that caliber onto this team when everybody's playing well, that means a guy like Cutter Gauthier can walk in here and have a great rookie season. We don't have to worry about bringing guys into a mess anymore. And I feel like that's the rebuild.
Yeah, but it's also like you said, right? Like it's hard to assess what you really have in certain players when the team's just playing terrible. And that's what it's been the last couple of years.
Especially with Hart, right? Or goalies in general.
Exactly, right? Like now I think the team really has the ability to identify, okay, our team's playing pretty well, even if they are going to go on like a stretch of bad games. Like it's going to happen at some point. I mean, it's
Of
hockey,
course.
like it's an 82 game season, but you can concretely look at it and say, okay, we have these certain things that work. What is not working that we really need to address, right? So, like
Right.
for example, like the
Power
penalty
play.
kill. Would yeah? Well, I was gonna say the penalty kill. Would you change anything about that? No, because it's tied for fourth best in the league, and it's contributing factor to probably a large majority of their wins. Like if you look at this team right now, let's say their penalty kill that's bottom four or top four right now, you put that in the bottom five, they probably don't win half of the games that they've won to this point. And that's what we said in the past, right? Special teams make such a difference. Now that the team's playing a lot better though, and you see, okay, well, the power play is really bad, that's something that you can try to identify. Does a player like a Michkov coming in and down the line, it's a player like a Gauthier down the line already address that? Who's to say? But their skill sets certainly should help a power play. So you are the Flyers management. You're thinking to yourself, well, okay, we have these guys coming. Should we wait to see what they can do when they get here before we like go crazy to try to fix the power play? So like
Right.
there's a little bit of patience involved too, even with certain
Yes.
things that you can now identify. But just like, yeah, one thing I wanted to add just before we kind of get on to the next topic here, Reeve, is just the penalty kill, I think, and just the special teams and how important that is to being a good team in the NHL. Like
Huge.
we said it for a couple of years on this podcast, right? Like with the Flyers in prior seasons, they had two, bottom 20, bottom 10 power play penalty kills at the same exact time. There's no way a team is going to be competitive on a nightly basis when you're to that level. And with the Flyers having a top 5 PK now, you're seeing how much is keeping them in games where in previous situations, where a team would totally light them up on the penalty kill, the Flyers are killing majority of those off. And then from that point, they're able to stay in games a lot longer and be more competitive versus allowing a bunch of goals. Obviously, the power play doesn't help. Like you look at yesterday's game against Nashville, they do not score on that power play. If they are able to score, they probably win the game, right?
Yeah. I was just about to follow up with, if the Flyers could get their power play in order, I mean, you look at their record, they would be at the top of the NHL. They would be
Yeah,
up there with the
exactly.
Rangers. It's really the fact that they're not good on the power play is the thing that's stopping them from being an upper echelon team. But again, they don't necessarily have the players developed at this point to have a top 5 power play in the league.
Yeah.
But they can definitely not be on the bottom end. They can
They can
definitely be
definitely be
middle of the
like
road.
20th in the league or something, not like
15 to 20, I think,
yeah.
is 100% within their wheelhouse to do. They just don't have a good system there. And I don't know if Rocky Thompson's going to be brought up in that. Again, he's doing a good job outside of the power play. It's not his only job, right? So I'm not saying the guy deserves to lose his job, but, they got to do something there. And I don't think it's just replacing talent.
Yeah, to be
That's not what I see.
fair, I mean, I thought that they moved the puck pretty well last night. It's just that they're unable to capitalize. And I just think it's a lot of it is sometimes being over patient in the sense that, okay, you had this opportunity, you
Definitely.
set the play up and you're just not taking the shot. You're holding on for too
Oh,
long, or you're trying to make another extra
100,
pass. And
100% agree with that.
teams can read that, right? So
I was watching a little bit of the Red Wings St. Louis game, kind of flipping back and forth. And you watch the Red Wings power play, not that it's like, the cornerstone of the NHL power play, but they move the puck and shoot. It's one, two shoot, 1-2 shoot. And our
yeah.
team does not do that. That's why it's a process thing in my mind that we're at the bottom of the league in the power play department. Again, we've improved a little bit, and I do agree. I think it's getting better. But a lot of it still is like that clutching and just waiting. And, they did a little bit too much of that last night in particular where, they opt for a pass. It's just get the puck on net. So many things can go right if you get the puck on net. There's almost no downside. At the very least, you get an offensive draw. You know what I mean? Like, there's no downside. There is a big downside to hesitating and making a pass that's unnecessary that either gets, that it causes a turnover, quite frankly, which is what happens to them most of the time on the power play. And then the team just dumps it and goes the other way. And it's just like, just get the puck on net. They should be just keeping it super simple when it comes to the power play.
Yeah, Detroit, I mean, just their power play in general, like now you add Patrick Kane and
Right. And I
it's
was
only
watching
gonna
it.
get better.
Yeah. And again, he's not going to be a miracle worker, but if you watch him on the power play, like he moves the puck quickly. If he's passing it, it's quick, and he'll take the shot. He has no problem taking the shot. Like, that's the thing. We have guys who they want the other guy to take the shot. Everybody should be thinking shoot, 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 shoot. You don't have a good power play, shoot the puck. Like,
Yeah, get it to the net. You can cause havoc, cause chaos. You never know what's going to
right.
happen. So
Yeah. The only place to hesitate from maybe is at the top of the umbrella, right? Because then you can cause a break the other way. But if you're anywhere near around the net, shoot it. Our power play stinks. What are you hesitating for? Like, what's the hesitation? All right, let's get into our next topic. And this is Carter Hart. Quite frankly, he has now been named one of the top goalies of the week. He had the best save percentage amongst all goaltenders with a .958 save percentage. He has looked exceptional. I brought this up to Vasili even prior to recording, but my roommate and he watches all sports, and he's been watching a lot of the Flyers with me. And he was like disappointed Hart wasn't playing last night when we were watching the Preds game together. The guy has just been lights out. His numbers have been exceptional of late. Again, I still stand by the fact I think he's a top 5 goalie in this league, regardless of what his numbers are. And I just think he's playing like it. And, Jamie keeps harping online that the Flyers need to sign him. I actually agree.
yeah, they should.
And you know what I realized also? And there's obviously more than just a year between them. It's probably a year and a half. But Ersan is 24. Carter Hart is 25. Like, for those who think that like Ersan's like this young 21-year-old goalie who's doing what Carter Hart, no, I still have not seen a goalie in a Flyers uniform be anywhere near as good as Carter Hart. I have not seen it. He is exceptional goalie. And I think he still stands a chance to be top 3 goalie in the league. Like one of those guys who every year is nominated for the Vezina. He has to have a really good team in front of him. And now he's getting good defense. I think his numbers will reflect that. And you saw as the team was playing well around him, his numbers skyrocketing up to the top of the league. So I just truly believe in Carter Hart. And I would like to see him re-sign. I don't know if the Flyers are going to jump to that. But I see no reason to move this kid at all. Right now, I'd rather replace Ersan with Kolosov than replace Carter Hart with Kolosov or Ersan. And I like Ersan a lot. I believe in him. I think he's a really good young goalie. But I just think Carter Hart is special. What are your thoughts there, Vasili?
Yeah, Hart's always had the pedigree, and obviously we see him come into the league, play really well, has a couple down seasons, but you have to understand that those down seasons, he's super young and he's in a league that's really tough on goalies, but also at an age where most goaltenders are not in the league at that point.
Yeah.
So those growing pains, I think at this stage, like if you look at last season, played really well. The numbers didn't really reflect it because the team was just shit. Like, let's be honest.
It played poorly in front of him.
Yeah, exactly. So that's going to drag your numbers down. But this season, the team's playing a lot better. And I think it really reflects more upon his numbers, right? And it's not just like those special goals saved above expected, because those are the kind of the numbers you look at when the team's bad, but the goalie's good. Where now you can kind of look at the save percentage and the goals against average and be like, oh yeah, Carter Hart's real good. And I mean, it all goes back to the technique for him, right? Like he does have the ability to make those athletic saves. Like you see him make those big cross crease robs in certain situations, but it's just always being in the right position, beating shooters to the pucks, like beating shooters to the point in a sense that, okay, teams making a cross-ice pass, he's there, right? Like there's no question about it. He's usually always in the right position, and that's always going to have an effect on your play and make the saves look easy, even though they're really difficult saves to make. But yeah, like if you're just looking at the traditional goalie stats right now, he's in the upper echelon of the league. 919 save percentage, 242 goals against average. So that's really, really good for a goaltender. And it's looking like he's going to get into that over 920 kind of save percentage. But this is a really interesting stat that was brought up by Alex Alpier on Twitter. And this kind of factors into the Flyers PK being so good, right? Obviously, Carter Hart has a huge part to play in that penalty kill, but Hart's on pace for the fourth best stats on the NHL PK. So that's at 150 minutes plus for a goalie to be playing for any goalie in the league since 2007, 2008. So Hart has a plus 457 expected goals saved above save percentage this season. That places him fourth for all goalies since 07-08. So I'll run down the list. So Corey Schneider in 2011, 2012 had a plus 609 goal save above expected on the PK. James Reimer, 2021-22 had a plus 553 goal save above expected on the PK. Semyon Varlamov in 2014-2015 had a plus 495 goal saved above expected on the penalty kill. Carter Hart at number 4 this season, plus 457 goals saved above expected on the PK. And then Ilya Sorokin last season had a plus 4.43 goals saved above expected on the penalty kill. So it just shows like on the PK, he's absolutely killing it. And I mean, it definitely contributes to the Flyers penalty kill being really good, but that just shows, right? Like you as a goaltender, think about the situation that you're in. Firstly, you're not just facing shots like off the rush or when a team is kind of looking to create chances when you're in a 5-on-5 situation, it's man-to-man coverage, but you're facing these opportunities when the team is actively holding possession in your end. Your team is a body down, and this is essentially where the teams are trying to, score as much as they can. So the fact that he's saving, that much goals above expected on the PK, where, he's been the fourth best goalie on the penalty kill for saves above expected since 2007, 2008. Like that's literally incredible stats. And then, I just think for the way Hart's playing in general, it's going to be tough when you go to try to re-sign him, because like now the stats are getting really good. Whereas beforehand you were it was almost like a best kept secret, right? Where like you had a really good goalie, but the team in front of him stunk. So the stats didn't look good. So he doesn't really have a lot of leverage in contract negotiations. Whereas now going forward, I mean, he's going to have a ton of leverage because he's a huge reason why the team's playing really well, but also the stats play into that. So I'm kind of interested to see like what the next contract essentially is going to be for him. But yeah, man, like incredible play from him. Like look at that Colorado game against one of the premier offenses in the league. He's stopping 37 of 39 shots, 949 save percentage, 2.20 goals against average there. Like that's just incredible for the way that he's playing right now. Like he's just, great stats, great overall play, not letting, tough rebounds or tough goals at untimely moments. Like he's making all the key saves at the key times. Like it's really everything and more that you can ask for a goaltender. Mm-hmm. And he actually does have too the essentially the best goals against average in the conference at 2.42. I believe the only other starter that's even close to him is Sergei Bobrovsky in the conference. So once again, so this is what it was. He has a 2.42 goals against average in 17 games. That's the lowest goals against of any starter aside from Bobrovsky, who also is at 2.42. So once again, just showing that he's one of the best goalies in the league. And I mean, we've believed that for the last couple seasons. We've kind of stated that, with the talent that he has and just the way that he plays in net, top 10 goalie in the league. It's just the fact that the team in front of him does not allow the stats to actually get to that point where you can say definitively, like he's a top 10 in the league, right?
Yeah. And this team is on an upward trend too. So those numbers will continue if they continue to play. Again, you're not looking at the names on the back end of this team and go, oh, well, he's got 3 superstar defenders in front of him. That's not the case here. So I think the Flyers would be wise to re-sign him long term. Again, Ersson, in my opinion, would be the guy to move, even though I like Ersson a lot, especially with Kolosov coming in here. But Ersson's locked up for cheap. So this would be a time where you can lock up Carter Hart for, I don't know, $7+ million. I don't know if you got to give him 7 years, but it's difficult to do that with goalies. But again,
to be honest, though, I'm 25. Not even. Yeah, I was gonna say, Yariv, like it's not a typical goalie that you're signing in his prime at 28. let's
Right,
say, and then
exactly.
he's going to be, 7 years brings him to 35, and then does he fall off? Like literally, Carter Hart being 25 here, you sign to 7 years, he'll be around 32 years old, and that's like between 29 and 32 is essentially a goalie's prime, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So you have him signed through his prime in that case. Like it's going to be really interesting to see what they do, just because he's playing like an upper echelon goalie in the league, and the Flyers' goalie depth is obviously insane. So something has to give, right? Where either you're signing him long term or you're planning to go with somebody else, but
Well,
there has to be a plan in place. So
well, the Flyers have 2 first-round picks this year. You look at their goalie situation with Kolosov coming over. Ersson, with a year left on his contract, could be worth a first-round pick. You know, maybe there's your option. You know,
yeah.
you want to get more assets. I don't know. I just look at it. I would want to keep
Or
the best of the group.
yeah, that too, right? You want to keep the best goalie who's proven it for a couple seasons versus one guy where the sample size is small. And let's say he comes back next season, doesn't play very well. We've seen a ton of goalies, or a ton of goalies in the league where that's happened to before, where they have a couple good seasons or a small sample size, and the next year they're totally a shell of their former selves. I think with Hart at this point, you've kind of already gotten past those growing pains where Urson you haven't seen at the NHL level. And as a goalie, they're bound to come because every goalie goes through them.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what they do. One thing or one scenario that I kind of thought of just on the spot here when you brought that up with the trading up, Yariv, is think about those picks, right? And let's say you're the Flyers and you don't finish in that top 10 and you want to kind of move into that space. Maybe Urson's a guy you package to try to move up in the draft. Every team needs a decent goalie. So that's something that maybe they look into, but I thought that
Yeah.
potentially could be something that they might try to explore. Who knows?
Yeah, no, I think all options are on the table. I would say even trading Hart is on the table, but I think it would be a humongous mistake. I mean,
I agree.
this
Yeah.
is the best goalie we've seen here in my
20
entire time.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say more. I've never seen a goalie this talented in a Flyers uniform ever.
Really since Hextall,
Right,
probably on that cup run, and then before that, Pelle Lindbergh, rest in
right.
peace.
It's
Right.
like we
So
we haven't had anybody like this. So with the whole trade Carter Hart crowd and all that, it's like again, unless you're giving me a bona fide superstar, like you want to give me Dreisaitl. This is what people were like laughing. I know when we like said this, but I was like, you want this guy? I'm not giving him up for less than a top 3 talent in my mind. There's no reason to. We can have one of the best goaltenders in the league for the next 7-8 years, and this team, like we were saying in the offseason, this whole idea of they'll be good in 4 or 5 years. I don't know where the hell that number came from. Obviously, those predictions were wrong already. So, you got to be prepared for when Michkov comes here. He's going to want a great goalie behind him. Cutter Gauthier is going to want a great goalie. Like, all this stuff matters. You keep the best players. And Carter Hart is clearly a superstar in my mind. This team has got 3 of them. And we'll talk about all 3 of them. And the next one on the list is Travis Konecny, who, I would say has even elevated his game above where he was last year. He has been everywhere, everywhere. Obviously, been the most dangerous guy in the shorthanded department with 3 shorthanded goals, putting up a couple games in a row with back-to-back 2-goal games. He's on pace, excuse me, for between 45 and 50 goals this year. I was saying it last year when he had the injury, and people are like, "Oh, is he a 40-goal scorer?" I'm like, he's already playing like a 40-goal scorer. It's like people are waiting for like the actual number to hit for it to be. He's already on that level, and he's a star player. I mean, you look at the way like he's very dangerous, and other teams are clearly trying to stop him. I don't think that they're like walking into it being like, "Oh, Konechny's good." He's already established himself as a top player on this team, so teams are already planning against him and they're not able to stop him. He's physical. He's a buzzsaw. Tries to hit everything. He's just physically fit. I love Travis Konecny. I love the way that he's playing, and I hope that it continues throughout the entire year because a bare minimum, the guy's a 30-goal scorer in the NHL at this point, and maybe can go beyond that. Again, he's playing with Sean Couturier, who's also, we'll talk about him in a minute, also a top player on the team, but he's not playing with like a Claude Giroux level playmaker. He's just doing it not all by himself, but he's doing it in his game. And I think you can throw him with almost anybody at this point, and he'll be putting up high end numbers. It'll just vary by 20%, whether, he puts up 70 or puts up 100 points in the league. That all depends on your line mates typically. He's not a generational talent, but he's clearly a star player. And he didn't make the All-Star team last year, even though he should have been on it. He's probably going to make the All-Star team this year. And well deserved. I think he looks like pure fire. And yeah, I'm loving what I see from Travis Konecny.
Yeah, Konechny, I mean, he's been doing really everything for them this season, just in terms of like an offensive standpoint, and even from a shorthanded perspective as well, right? He's producing there, and that's really been a momentum changer. But I think a lot of it for him too is just like goals at the right times. Like he's either scoring to start the team off, in a sense, like to begin games. He has a lot of goals in the first period already, and he's kind of setting the team on a good foot forward in that respects. But he's also scoring at big moments, like in the third period, stuff like that. But I thought this was a crazy stat that I saw. Like Konechny, 47 goals over his last 88 games in the last two seasons. So that's really, really good, obviously. His goal distribution too is mainly at even strength. I believe 34 of those goals are at even strength of the 47 over the last two seasons. So that just shows, like, obviously a bunch shorthanded, but that just shows a shooter of his caliber. They're not even really setting him up to score on the power play really very often. So imagine if you had a power play that was decent, how much more would the guy be scoring? How much more would the guy be scoring? Like the power play stinks, and he already leads the team in goals and is in the top 10 in scoring in terms of goal scoring for the whole league right now. But I mean, Konechny, in terms of offense, he's certainly their best player. 24 points in 28 games. That's 16 goals and 8 assists for him this season. And he's also a plus 11. So it's not even like he's scoring a bunch of goals and getting burned defensively or anything like that. He's also, a really responsible player in his own end as well. And that shows just by the fact that John Tortorella is confident enough to use him on the PK like he does. And he's playing quite a bit of ice time, right? Like 1846 average time per game. Such as shows that they're not afraid to use him in really any situation. So Konechny, I think, is really a great point and a great standpoint, like kind of for us to make, Yariv, in terms of what do we always say about players, right? Like a young player's not fully developed at age 23, age 24. Like Travis Konechny was not producing at this level at age 23 or age 24. And that's what's happened here, right? Like there's a natural progression in his game. He's elevated his game. He's developed his game. And that's sometimes what happens with younger guys. Like you see a certain talent. You knew that he was a really fast skater. You knew that he had a really nice shot, but it's taken him this time to put it all together finally. I think what we're seeing right now is like the finished product almost of what a Travis Konechny is, and just being a really top level goal scorer in the NHL and being able to affect the game on the score sheet almost essentially every time that he's on the ice. Because if you're looking at it from another team's perspective, when you're trying to defend the Flyers, who's that one guy that you're picking out? And it's Travis Konechny, right? So he's done everything for them in terms of an offensive standpoint so far this season, and I only expect that to continue. I mean, I think he's on a 48 goal pace right now. Like if he ends up hitting 48 goals or even the 50 mark, like he's an elite level talent in my mind when you're scoring in that echelon and you're scoring, amongst the top 10, 15 players in the league in terms of goal scoring. That only cements you there. And I think the fact that he has kind of risen to this level now, it definitely shortens things in terms of, okay, what else and what type of other like offensive skill sets do you have to add, right? Like you already have kind of a Michkov in the wings waiting down the line here. You have Gauthier coming up as well. Like there's only so many spots for, wingers on the team to be in your top six. So obviously like he's going to be one of those guys that's here. I think there's no question in my mind. Like you hear people saying, oh, it's a rebuild. You have to trade Konechny in his prime. The value is never going to be higher. And I look at that and say, do you see many teams trading their best player and goal scorers that are top 10 in the league. Like it's not a very, often or a thing that happens often, right? So I just think that you see what Konecny's doing and the fact that he's playing to this, level, it only bodes well for the Flyers and, how short this actually might be versus, the 4 to 5 years down the line that everybody was kind of projecting.
Yeah. And look at the Vancouver Canucks and how many people gave up on their core last year, and look at what they're doing this year. It's like this overreaction to a team playing poorly. It's like, but where are they, right? Like Vancouver is pretty much like lockstep. I think we would be where Vancouver is if we had a decent power play. We'd be at
Their
the
power
top of
play
the
is
league.
really good. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's like, again, we have a fantastic penalty kill, but again, look at what the numbers he's putting up without Elias Pettersson in the middle, right? A top producing, like Sean Couturier is phenomenal, but he's never going to be at the top of the league in scoring, and he's not a playmaker at the top of the league. That's not his game. They don't even have that guy, and the power play here is not even rolling. And look at what kind of points he's putting up. And I love that you brought up the age thing. You already know, like in my opinion, the idea of a 23-year-old being fully developed is a joke. So yeah, it's just
That's what I mean.
more
Like, look
evidence.
look how at the strides Konecny took between what is he now, 27 or 26?
26.
Yeah. So like, look at the strides that he took from being 22 to now. If you would have said at 22, well, this is what you are, and we give up and you were going to
Which a
trade
lot
you,
of people did.
you would have missed out on this path that he's taken and he would have became this goal scorer on another team, right? But the Flyers don't see it that way. They have some patience, and you have to kind of remember that when you look at some players, and even when they start to bring in some younger draft picks down the line, you're like, it's not always going to be an instant thing. And just because a player, is good at the age of 22 doesn't mean he can't get better.
And honestly, if you want more evidence that the Flyers don't think that way, why do you guys think they brought in John LeClair and Patrick Sharp, two guys who literally didn't hit their stride till their mid-20s? Like, they're not going to think, oh, he's 22, he is what he is. Is Danny Briere going to do that? Like, literally, three of
He
the
would have
top
been out of the
voices.
league. Well,
Right.
Briere wouldn't have even been as good as he was in the league or even had the opportunity if teams didn't let him develop. Like at age 22, he was in the minors on the Coyotes. So yeah, it's just crazy to me that people think in that way. But
people want instant gratification. And, we were just talking about this before we recorded. Look at the Detroit Pistons in the NBA. They've been picking every year at the top of the draft. They have 3 wins this year. The Sixers are playing them tonight. They have 3 wins 20 some games into the season.
Yeah, like the draft picks and the high picks are great, but if there's no actual structure within the team, like consistent losing does not help a player's development whatsoever. Right?
And also, there's no guarantee that a guy at the top of the draft, which again, I'll bring up Mitchkov again, and we'll talk about him at the end. But again, he wasn't even taken second overall where he should have been in this draft. Yes, the other players are exceptional too. It was a historic draft. But the guy was not supposed to drop to us at 7. Like typically, you do not get a guarantee of a superstar like that. You might get a star player. It only the guarantee of the top 10 is really just a good player in the league. And that could be of varying degrees. So like none of the tank mentality, in my opinion, is valid, especially when you have to build a 23-man roster, not a 5-man roster like basketball. And you have to hope that draft, like this upcoming draft, is also strong, but it's not last year's draft. It's not there's not guarantees like Bedard and Mitchkov in there.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to our next topic, and that is Sean Couturier. And I think what we really want to talk about, outside the fact that he's clearly looking better and better every day, he's clearly not even 100% back yet. Typically, after missing so much time, you really don't see that till 50% through the season, and they haven't even hit that mark. But he's starting to look more and more like himself. He's scoring a lot of big goals for this team. This team clearly drives off of him, which I'm a little surprised he hasn't gotten an A. But Torts did kind of say he wasn't going to give it out any more letters.
I think he's going to get the C, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, he is the captain of this team. It's quite obvious to me personally that he's the captain of this team. And he's just starting to look better and better. I mean, he is going to be there in that Selke Trophy nominee conversation. Yeah, he's only a +8, but he's doing it with his point production is going up now. He's not at a point per game, but he's not that far from it. And again, if you look at his underlying numbers, they're phenomenal. And he continues to be what we thought he would be. And this is another upper echelon player in the league. And what we were talking about is like you don't have to be a top producer in the league to be an upper echelon player. He does it because his defensive game is top 3 in the league among centers, in my opinion. And he can also produce at a high clip, and that makes him a star player. So, the combination of him and TK gives the Flyers a real top line right now. And then considering they have one of the best rookies in the league with Tyson Forrester, I think things are starting to come together for a real top line. But Sean Couturier is looking really good. I think he still has another gear. And I think we'll see that as the season goes on. I think we'll see a little bit more dominant play offensively, but it's nice to see that he's scoring and he's still driving play. I'd love to see him kind of center around fixing the power play. Again, he did a really good job in the bumper position years ago. He's good in front of the net. Like, this is a guy who can definitely drive more offense than he's driving right now. I think he could be at a point per game pace where he was prior to his injury by the end of the season. But I think that's the player he is, point per game guy who also plays against the best players in the world. And that's what I talk about all the time. You don't need the best center in the league. You don't need the best players in the league. You need players who can play against the best players in the league and support them with a good cast. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah, Couturier, obviously, just if you look at the offensive things, that was what was slow to come to start the season, right? You could kind of tell his offensive timing just was not there.
Yeah.
But like defensively and all the little aspects in terms of like, okay, positioning in your own end, the way you kind of skate the puck up through the neutral zone, even being able to hem other teams in there and while he's on the ice. Like, if you look at Couturier and just his line and that line that he's been on this season, I would equate that any line Couturier is on is the Flyers' top line. But if you look at his Corsi percentage as a player, like, it's over 50% this season. And that essentially means that majority of the time when he's on the ice, the Flyers are controlling the puck and controlling the play. That just speaks to the level of the player and the impact that he has. And we kind of talked about this before we recorded, but the fact that you have a guy like him, it just makes so much sense why the team is performing the way they are right now, because he inevitably allows you to slot in the rest of your roster where they need to be, right? Like, Couturier has shown in the past he can handle, top minutes against another team's top line. And before him coming back, the Flyers actively had either a Noah Cates or a Morgan Frost in that role, taking on the other team's top line. So if you look at it that way and you kind of try to compare Couturier coming back to where the Flyers are this season, it makes a lot of sense, because now you have those, other players and other centers on your roster matching up against a second line or a third line instead. And that, opens up more opportunities for them, and they're not getting overwhelmed in their matchup, right? Having to take on like a Connor McDavid or like a Ryan O'Reilly and a Philip Forsberg, for example, last night. But yeah, if you look at just Couturier's play from yesterday's game, I thought the goal, or the first goal that he scored, that's just like a vintage Couturier type play where like, oh, okay, Sean Couturier's kind of like back. Like, when he scored that one, that was kind of my thought process, because you see him coming up the eye or in his own zone. Firstly, makes a really nice defensive play to get the puck moving the other way. Then in the neutral zone, he makes, another subtle play where he gets the puck over to Farabee as he comes out of the box. And then Farabee sends the puck back to him on the 2-on-1 on the odd man rush. And most guys are going to shoot that puck literally right away. Couturier has the wherewithal and the offensive acumen to kind of hold on to it for a split second. He lets Saros open his 5-hole up, and then he slides it under the 5-hole. So I thought that was like a vintage Couturier play, in the sense that he's making a play in all 3 zones, making a really smart offensive play that most people aren't really going to point out. But without him holding onto the puck there for a couple extra seconds, right? Like, he's not going to score that goal. And then in general, like, he's got 21 points this season and that is in 26 games. So he's only 5 points off from a point per game pace. And I would 100% agree that he is in the Selke conversation just with the way he's playing defensively. Look at the Flyers PK, and he's a major factor there. And just the fact that he's almost putting up, a point a game. Like you said, right? I think right now, at least offensively, I think defensively he's pretty much back to where he was. Maybe face-offs aside, right? Like he still had a bit of struggles there, but offensively is probably maybe 80% of what he previously was. And I'll be interested to see if he can kind of get back to that full offensive kind of acumen that he showed before the injuries. But Couturier, man, just showing that he is a top center in this league in terms of two-way play. The one thing that I will be interested to see as the kind of season goes along is he's getting 1931 time on ice per game. That's more than any other forward on the team right now. Konecny second with 1846. So I wonder, like, if the team looks to kind of monitor that just as things go
They said
along.
they would.
They said they would, but they're not. So I just,
I
that's what I
told you
mean.
that would happen, man. We talked about it in the offseason. No coach looks at Sean Couturier, who's healthy, and goes, yeah, I think I'm going to play him less tonight, you know?
Yeah, I know. But the thing is, Tortorella's even said in press conferences,
Yeah.
right? He said, like, we're really trying to limit his ice time. And then
But
I
he
look
doesn't.
I look at the stats like before we're getting ready for the show, just as I prepare, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, 1946 leads all forwards in time on ice per game. Like they might be trying to limit it, but like what's limiting it? Are they like limiting him from, oh, we're not playing him 22 minutes a night, we're playing him
They
under 20, right?
well, what I think they've done is they've reduced his shorthanded time
I
slightly.
agree, yeah, because they
That's
have they have more players to use, more
yeah,
combos on rotation, so it
yeah.
makes sense.
That's really well, and that does actually make sense because that's a very physically grueling role and one that requires a lot of shot blocking and checking. You're outnumbered constantly, so I think it is kind of wise to do that. But you don't want to limit on the power play. One, because your power play stinks and he's one of your top players, and two, that's an opportunity to get his offensive game going, which you really want to do because you want to get him to where he was prior to this, where he was a 35 plus goal scorer, which I think that's still what he is. I don't know if he's like above that. I think that requires having a prime top. I think that for most teams, if you really want got all multi goals. I'm sorry, multiple players on the team scoring 40 plus goals, like we see on some other teams where their offense is rolling. It requires having top tier playmakers. And we don't necessarily have that on this team. We got some young guys who show some potential to be able, but we don't have like I think Michkov could drive somebody's game to going up that high. Obviously a kid like Bedard, but it's typically a veteran in the league. Like a Kucherov, right?
Yeah,
Like those type of players, a Patrick Kane in his prime. Like those are the type of guys who can take guys who are 35 goal scorers and make them 50 goal scorers, right? Otherwise, it doesn't normally happen. It can happen. It's not impossible, but it really needs, you got to have every element of your team kind of filled, right? You need an entire good team and you need all the roles filled to have that type of performance. So let's actually talk about a guy, and you mentioned him earlier, Noah Cates. I was just kind of thinking about this with how the team's playing and how the penalty kill is playing. Does this team miss Noah Cates? And I think most people's reaction right now would be no, because of his offensive output was pretty low, even though him and Frost are both of them are not really producing much this year. Um, though Frost a little bit better. And I think Cates obviously struggled offensively, but I actually kind of do. You look at the amount of penalty kill time he played. There are times where I've been watching this team play where I'm like, man, Noah Cates would have won that battle. And I think I'd really like to see this lineup with how it is right now, with Cates in it, with Delorier sitting, even though I think he's done a good job. And I'd really like to see how this team can actually flesh out all four lines. Because the fourth line's not really scoring. Ryan Paling's not scoring or anything like that on a regular basis. But I think Noah Cates still has a lot to give. I still think he is definitely can produce at a much higher clip, similar to what he was doing last year, if not above that. Um, and I think this team does miss Noah Cates a little bit. Not too bad, but this is a sign of a good team. Ones that, can lose key players and still keep rolling and kind of do next man up because Paling has done a good job, right? The bottom six in general has done a good job this year. But I'm really interested to see, what this team is like when Noah Cates gets back. I kind of miss him. I miss his defensive play because he's another case like Couturier where maybe his offensive game is not going to be as high as Couturier's. He might never be a point per game player like Couturier is, but his defensive game is at a very, very high level, and he's really just entering his career, right? He only had his rookie year last year. So what are your thoughts on Noah Cates being out?
I think for Cates, you hit the nail on the head, Yariv. Like it's more of a defensive aspect versus the offense. I think from an overall perspective, though, the Flyers being as good as they are, like 10-3-2 here in their last 15, like technically he's a part of some of that. Obviously, he gets injured kind of midway through that stretch of the 15 games, but like they're not missing him because you look at the results on the ice and they're still playing really well. They're still in, all these games. They're winning a majority of these games. Like look at, they're on before this loss here, right? They're on a 4-game winning streak, obviously without Cates. So it just shows that in a sense, like, are they missing him right now? No, but from a defensive aspect, I would say like his skill set is something you would miss. Obviously, he's a really smart player on the ice. That's something you also miss, just knowing the right position to be in at certain times. But I do agree, like, I think the best lineup this team can ice still does have a Noah Cates within it. And like what you said, probably a Nick Delorier coming out. Are we ever going to see that lineup? I do not know. I'm not sure if we're going to see that lineup this season. It seems like the coach is adverse to.
Also, could be other injuries.
Yeah, maybe if there's other injuries, we do end up seeing a lineup where Cates is in with Frost and Brink. But my thought process is once Cates comes back, you might see a Frost come out. But who really knows at this point? It's still too early to tell. I think it depends on what's happening around that time. Like how's the team playing during that time where he's, getting ready to come back. Like, are they in a slump? Are they playing well? Is there a reason to take somebody out and put him back in? But I think definitely on the penalty kill, even though it's a top 4 penalty kill in the league right now, like you do miss him on the PK just because he's a really effective penalty killer. So maybe the PK could be even better, right, with him in the lineup.
I think he was leading. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think he was leading all forwards in shorthanded time prior.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me because, as I said, right, like he is a really good penalty killer, leading the team obviously in that type of usage before the injury, but just shows that the Flyers penalty kill is so good that you can take away the guy they're giving the most ice time to in that particular situation, and they still, are killing the majority of other opposition chances in terms of power play. So I think for Cates, what you really want to see is more of the scoring this season. And hopefully that's what you do see from him when he comes back. What I'm most interested to see with Cates is when he does make it back in here, does he come in as a center or does he come in as a wing?
Right. Yeah.
Because, they ended him off against the Islanders as a winger, and then he got hurt. And he actually looked like one of their best offensive players in that game as a winger, like just what he can do as the F1 on the forecheck. Like when he was his best in college, it was on the wing, being that first forechecker in and really like causing havoc, causing turnovers, beginning like a strong forecheck for his team. And we saw that with the Frost Cates Tippett line to end the season a few years ago. Not last season, but the season before that, right? So I'm wondering maybe if they end up putting that line back together. Like I know they have Frost,
they
Brink.
Need size on the wing.
Yeah, they have guy. They have Frost, Brink, and Tippett right now. I wonder maybe Cates comes back. You kind of plug Frost in, or not Frost, plug Cates into that line. Let's say you drop Brink down, you take a Delorier out. I wonder if something like that might happen, but we'll ultimately see. I think, it's something where if the Flyers are kind of playing not really well, like are in a lull in terms of a stretch, like when he's close to coming back, then I think we'll see him kind of get subbed in for somebody else like a Frost or a Brink. But if they're playing really well and he's healthy, who knows if he kind of gets found into some sort of rotation here, right? Where like they are hesitant to put him back in because the team's playing so well. It'll be really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, no, for sure. And if Forrester wasn't playing so well, that's a role that Cates, I think, could do a really good job in and playing with Couturier and TK.
Just
on
being
the
the
wing
retriever
also.
on that line, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I think Forrester's he's earned that spot for a little bit here, unless he drops off. But it'll be interesting. I still want to see a fourth line with like Lawton, Paling, and Hathaway. Not again. I hate ripping on Delorier. I don't think he's been bad. I don't think he's a guy who deserves to be benched or anything like that. But he is the least talented player on the team, and it's obvious. And the Flyers, they need the toughness, quite frankly. But that fourth line of how they can move, and if you put like Lawton in the middle and Paling on the left, and Paling's got a lot of speed too, and let him get in on the forecheck first, like things like that. I think it could get interesting, and
That could
I
be a
would
really good shutdown line. So
right. That's what I'm saying. All of a sudden, your fourth line is actually a shutdown line, and then your third line could be more of a scoring line. It's I don't know. There's all kinds of opportunities there. We'll see what they do moving forward. All right. So a lot of talk about trading. It's way too early for this. Again, I stand, and I think you're probably with me on this. I stand by the fact that if the Flyers are in the playoffs, I would not expect to see players traded. I see a lot of people talking about how guys have to be traded, like Sean Walker must be traded. I'm really kind of in the camp, and I have like a bunch of names here, but we can just talk about them in group.
yeah,
Um, but I'm still in the camp that Sean Walker is going to get re-signed. I think Rasmus Ristolainen is more likely to get traded, especially with all the buzz that's been going on. That Toronto apparently is interested, which I'm not surprised. That comes all the way from last year. That seems more like an off-season trade to me, because of his contract and whatnot. But guys who I think could be traded, like again, if the Flyers are out of the playoffs, if this collapses, which is absolutely possible, and they're 10 points out, 12 points out of the playoff spot by the time the trade deadline rolls out. Flyers could opt to go in that direction, and that would be under the rebuild model. And I think guys that could be traded, Sean Walker is absolutely possible to be traded. I just think he's shown that he fits this team, and he's shown that his value is much higher than his contract, and I think you can get him for relatively cheap. I think you'll probably re-sign him for what he was making already on a relatively short term deal. You'll probably get him for 2-3 years, similar to what like Garrett Hathaway got. But I think he's been awesome, and I think he's a guy I'd actually like to see stay here. I think Frost is kind of losing his identity with his team. I think that's kind of a little bit obvious, probably to a lot of players. He hasn't played poorly, but again, he's got 6 points in 18 games. It's not awful, but it's not great either. And again, as we kind of bring in other young players into this lineup, what is his role with this team? I'm not exactly sure. That is a guy who I think, whether the Flyers are in the playoffs or not, could be traded, to be honest with you. And that would be more of a hockey trade. Probably not for a pick, but probably more for like another young guy that's either struggling or, just doesn't fit a system, or the team's looking for a different type of player. He's a guy I could see leaving town. I'm a little hesitant to trade Sealer at this point, but he's a guy who, if they're not in the playoffs, I imagine he will get moved regardless. I can't see him getting a long-term deal, even though he's played fantastic, way above everybody's expectations, proven to be 100% an NHL defenseman, and a pretty good one at that, especially a combination of him and Walker. Ryan Paling, I think, absolutely will get traded if the Flyers are not in a playoff position. Otherwise, I think again, you got to figure what you get back for some of these guys. Like if you're going to get a third round pick for Sealer, okay, fine. It's not a game breaking thing. You get a fourth round pick for Paling, not groundbreaking. Cam Atkinson is a guy, he's got 1 year left on his deal beyond this year. He is a guy I think the Flyers are very open to trading, regardless of, how his production moves forward. He is struggling a little bit right now. But he's a guy who, when the younger guys come in, that is their spot to take. And I think he's a guy they will try to move probably in the offseason. And if they're not able to, he's a trade deadline move. They'll probably be overripe with wingers. We have too many of them here as it is. I like Cam Atkinson. Everybody likes Cam Atkinson. I think he will get out of the scoring slump as well. He's got a couple assists that he's been throwing in lately. He had an important one last night. But he's a guy I could see getting traded. And then Scott Lawton, I don't think they're jumping to move this guy at all, whatsoever. He's also another guy I could see getting re-signed. But he's obviously got a lot of trade value. So it's something that'll be in the mix. And, there's other opportunities. But I guess I'll kind of mix this in there as well. Actually, no, you know what? I'll say that. But those are few guys that I could see being traded. At least within the next year or so. I think Rasmus Ristolainen most likely will get traded at some point before his contract ends. I think he's still really good on this team. I think he's just getting back and getting where he's supposed to be. So I'm not like saying hasn't had a positive impact and is not good. And in fact, the Flyers have 3 good pairings right now.
Yeah.
But he's a guy who I don't know fits the long term goal of this organization. He does fit the style of the team, but I think they'll want to reallocate that money because I think regardless of how good Travis Sanheim has played here, I think the Flyers will eventually try to go out and get a big name defender to add to this team. I think that is the number one thing that they will try to add from a free agent standpoint or trade standpoint is try to bring in a big name defender. And I think that's a lot of what they were talking about building from the back end out. You get Carter Hart locked up. You keep Sanheim because he's playing really well. You already got York. You got Oliver Bonk, right? You got other young defensemen. You got hopefully potentially keeping Walker. Then if you can remove Bristow's dollars and bring in a guy who's going to be significantly more expensive, but a guy who can move the defense into another level with somebody who can potentially run a power play. Maybe if York doesn't develop into that guy, I think Risto is a likely candidate to go, and I think so is Frost. And for all we know, they could be moved together. I could see Toronto being interested in a trade like that, quite frankly. I could see Toronto definitely be interested in Frost and Risto. But again, if the Flyers are in the playoffs, I would not expect anybody of any significance to get traded because why would you punish your team for playing well? Why would you not let them go in together and go into the playoffs to get a second? I mean, not even a second, to get most likely a 3rd round pick for most of these guys. Risto's the only one on this list that's most likely to be traded that will bring back, a potential high pick. And I don't even know at this point. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think it just depends, like you said, on where the team lays in terms of what exactly they're going to do here, right? Like if they're in the playoffs, I wouldn't imagine that they're going to trade many of the guys that you mentioned on the list. It just is what it is. Like we don't see that happen in the NHL often. When you see a team that's secured themselves in a playoff spot that sells, like when was the last time that we saw a team that does that? Right? It's been probably years. I don't know if you could even name a team that's done that. But yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, buddy. Just real quick, we do want to emphasize that rebuild, and I'm sure you agree with me on this. The attitude would be, even if they're in the playoffs, they will not be trading for assets for a player to bring in. They'll roll in
They're
with
not going
what
to
they
be
have.
buying, right? And we have a topic kind of getting into that after this that we'll talk about. But yeah, I think maybe the only guy they might trade if they are in a playoff spot is Walker or Risto. And I would say both of those guys are on the table, just depending on what exactly it is they can get back. And just because they have a logjam defense and some young guys they want to bring up and give experience to. So I could see that playing a factor. Like it depends. Like I think if you're the Flyers and Sean Walker gets you a 1st round pick, even if you're in the playoffs, then I think
could? You think he could, by the way he's playing?
Yeah, I think it just depends on how he plays the remainder of the season here leading up to the deadline. Like I
have to consider that.
That's what I mean, right? Like I think if he plays in this manner, like let's say right now he continues to play the same way he's been playing all season up until the deadline. I think at that point, like he's cemented himself as a legitimate top 4 option. Teams are going to see the fact that this guy's not only playing in a top 4 role over 20 minutes a night, he is producing pretty decently offensively, and he's getting PK time and has seen some power play time.
Do you trade Sealer and Walker together?
Well, I was going to bring that up because Elliot Friedman mentioned on 32 Thoughts that teams have been sniffing around the Flyers and what their thoughts are on trading them together. I think it just depends on what it brings me if I'm Briere, right? Like, what do I get if I trade Sealer and Walker as a package versus trading them separately, right? Like, I think that's what kind of entices me as a GM. Like, does me trading Sealer and Walker as a package get me a first and a 2nd round pick? Does that up it because you get them together as a pair?
But what if, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but what if you're like 3rd in the division? Like definite playoff spot, right?
Definite playoffs. I mean, I think it's hard. Like it's a hard situation, obviously, as the GM, because
Yeah.
if you trade them both as a pair and you're third in the division, you effectively said to your team, yeah, we don't believe in you guys.
Right. Exactly.
And then what does that do to the morale? What does that do for the team going ahead? So like I don't envy Briere in the position that he's in, because he might very well be in that position.
Yeah.
And it's really tough as a GM, but that's why he's making all the money, right? Because he's gonna have to make this type of decision. And it's a hard one. Personally, I wouldn't trade those guys, because I think it really sets a bad example for your young players that look at how hard we played, look at how hard we worked, and then you're basically giving them a big fuck you.
Yeah, you're neutering two. They know how well these guys have played. Their teammates.
Well, they've effectively bumped Risto into a third pair role where you're paying $5.25 million for a third pair defenseman right now. I think that's probably why the team wants to trade him too, because they realize that they're paying $5.25 million for a third pair defenseman. I think for Sealer and Walker specifically, like if you trade them as a pair and you can get a first round pick in a second, like whereas you would only get a first for Walker and a third for Sealer, I think you kind of have to do it just because you're maximizing the value for two guys that probably aren't going to be here when you're, you know, a cup contender perennially here, right, for the next handful of seasons down the line. But if you're not getting a first for Walker, personally, I wouldn't trade him. I think you'd be, smart to keep him and keep your number 4 defenseman and a guy that really fits into the system well. But I personally think Walker will get you a first round pick. Just look at the NHL at the past trade deadline, where you have a Vladislav Gavrikov getting a first round pick and Dennis Savard getting a first round pick. Can you actively say that Walker hasn't played as well as those guys did in the season that they got traded? Right. And he's a right-handed shot. So I think, you add all those factors in, but it's obviously contingent on him playing and continuing to play this well. If his play falls off a cliff, then he probably doesn't get that for you. But yeah. I mean, I don't see any signs pointing to him not playing this well. So that's just my thought process. Like, I think you probably can sneak a late first round pick for him potentially. In terms of some of the other guys on the list here that we kind of went through, like Ristolainen, rumored to the Leafs. Hey, if you're the Flyers and you can unload Risto to the Leafs, I think getting rid of that contract makes the most sense. You can allocate that $5 million, like you said, to levy of different areas on the roster. And I think that kind of benefits you as a team. I mean, for the Flyers, despite Sanheim playing super well here, you still need to see more than one season of this to definitively say, oh, he's a bona fide number 1, defenseman in the league. So I think for the Flyers, what they're probably looking to do is maybe move Risto's money, use that salary cap going up, and then kind of combine that together, that $5 million, the $4 million, the cap's going up, and maybe like make a trade or big UFA signing for that like bona fide top pair guy. And then you have him and Sanheim together. But obviously it depends on what's out there, right? Like if the team that you're trading Risto to wants you to eat half his salary and there's 3 years remaining after this, I don't know if that's the best idea. So we'll have to see, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're eating so much cap space between him and Kevin Hayes down the line here. And then that detriments.
You might have to buy out Pedersen also, right?
Yeah. And that detriments you, right, when you're trying to add, let's say when the team's good. So I think
it's next year.
Yeah. So like, it's something that they'll have to be really wary of. It's something they'll have to be really wary of if they do trade Risto, just in terms of like the salary retention. For Paling, Atkinson, Lawton, like I think Paling's definitely a candidate to get traded. I just think if they're in a playoff spot, why remove your depth? Atkinson,
but he is a guy who, if you can get something for him, he is replaceable in this lineup, especially with Cates being healthy.
Yeah, he's been scratched before, right? So maybe it's somebody, even if they're in that playoff spot, they say, hey, like we can bring someone up for Lehigh Valley to play that 13th forward role. Let's get like a draft pick for him, especially if they're not going to end up trading Walker or Sealer.
Depends what the offer is, but I think you're spot on.
And then for Atkinson, I mean, I think they're actively, like you said, like I would basically parrot your response here, Eve. Like they're probably looking to move him. Yeah. I just think the wing depth in general is going to see him pushed out fairly quickly here.
Yeah, and it's not even this season. It's next season when he's on the last year of his deal, which is good. And then beyond, and then you got to re-sign Konecny and you got to move money out. So he is a guy I think they'll be looking to move.
And then, Scott Lawton, they might have missed the boat on, to be honest. Like, and this is my opinion on it. Like, I really like Lawton. I love just what he brings off the ice and leadership aspects and everything like that. But there was rumors when I was at the draft and like we were hearing things like in the media room and stuff like that, that potentially, St. Louis was offering up a first round pick for him, or Toronto offering up a first round pick for him. Like, I definitely understand those off ice attributes and how that all like plays into, creating a good locker room, a good environment. And I think the good locker room and that type of environment is propelling this team to be playing how well that they're playing right now. But just the fact that you might have missed out on a first round pick for a guy that is really a third line, fourth line player, I think that's something that the Flyers might look back on and say, well, in one of the deepest drafts in NHL history, maybe we would have wanted to pick in that first round again.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I look at it where you're like, okay, maybe you missed the boat, but there's no telling, like, you might be able to get a high pick for him again down the line here. So maybe it makes sense to move him later on, but that's just my perspective with that past draft being as deep as it was. Maybe you would have wanted to take advantage of another pick there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. So next topic I have is, and I don't think we have to linger on this too much, but anybody you think that has more to give on this team? Two people who I think stick out for me the most, and I have Cates on here, but we already talked about Cates, is Owen Tippett. I think he showed flashes of it. I wish he would get a little more ice time, but I do want to see him continue what he did last year with the physical element of his game. He's done some of that this year, but I really want to see more of that power forward side of him. I think he's capable of a lot more goals, even though he's on a good pace right now. I'll definitely hit 20 goals again. I just think he has a higher ceiling than that. And I think, it could take time. Again, he's a former top 10 pick. And then the other guy I have is Cam York, who I just want to see more offensively from him as well. Defensively, I don't think he's been bad. Again, he's super young, but I think both these guys have an opportunity to improve their game as the season goes on, and become bigger, larger offensive impacts on this team. York, especially with the help we need on the power play. I'd like to see him, build on his offensive game and take over that. He should have taken over that top power play spot permanently. And he's not necessarily there, right? He's had some good flashes on the offensive side this year, some really nice shots, but he hasn't been consistent enough offensively. And I could say the same thing about Tippett a little bit, though. I think a little bit with that is just opportunistic moments. And he's also been streaky. So there's been times where he looks awesome, and then other times where he disappears a little bit more, like against Nashville. He didn't have a bad game by any stretch, but I would just like to see him be a scoring threat more often. I think he has, we talked about Travis Konecny. He has some of that Konecny ability to be explosive and be dangerous. So we'll see how he is over the next, couple of years here. I imagine he will get re-signed. But those are two guys I would want to see more from this season specifically.
Yeah, honestly, I would say the same. I would definitely want to see more from Tippett just from a goal scoring perspective. I think everybody expected him to score at a higher pace that he is currently doing this season. Though, like you said, he's still on pace to probably get around like 25, 30 goals at this point. I think, yeah, he has 9 goals, 8 assists, 17 points in 28 games this season. And I think you're right, Yariv, just in the sense that the ice time factor is probably playing an effect. Like, he only has 15, 17 time on ice per game. And I'm almost like 99% sure it was much higher last season because he's essentially playing a first line role last year. And this season, he just is not, right? With Couturier back in the fold, obviously, and Atkinson. York, too, like, I think it's just the offensive aspects. Like, defensively, he's been really solid, playing first line D pair minutes against the top lines in the league. Yep. He's really held his own. And I think it's just him trying to figure out, okay, how do I not lose anything on the defensive side and still bring the offense back in, right? Yep. And like, he has it because you saw him score that goal in Arizona where he brings the puck down. It was the 4th goal. He toe drags around and absolutely roofs a shot. Like, the kid has the skill to really bring the offense out. I just think he is trying to pick his spots on when to do it. And he isn't sure, like, because he doesn't want to rush up in the play and they get burned. And then, you find yourself kind of sitting or on the outside looking in. So that could be a factor too, right? Where we've kind of seen where the defensive play dips, Tortorella isn't afraid to kind of send a message and kind of, bench a guy in a period or something like that. So that could play a factor. But I think York and Tippett are definitely two candidates that you hit the nail on the head on, Yariv, just bringing that up. Bobby Brink in a sense too, like
Good one. Yeah.
even though he played really well at stretches this season, and then even in the Colorado game, right? Like he was one of their best players. Same with the Arizona game. He's one of their best players there too. But it's just a consistent thing or a consistency thing where like on a game-to-game basis, you aren't really seeing him make a difference, but I'll have those select games where you see it all like click for him, and then he's having really good games and really setting plays up with his offensive vision and his IQ. But I think for Brink, it's probably just the fact that he's a rookie at this point. Like you're going to have your ups and downs as a rookie where it's not always clicking for you as you would want it. But I am interested to see like as the season goes along and as Cates gets healthy here, like is Brink a guy that consistently stays in the lineup, or does he get put back into that rotation here? So we'll see.
No, I think that's a great point. I'd like to see him step up a little bit more, but I could see him being streaky too. I mean, you can see Forster's offense went hot, and then now, not that he's played poorly, but it's gotten colder. It's a lot of the rookie growing pains, right?
Yeah, figuring out the NHL on an everyday basis is tough, and how to play like that, night to night. That's one of the toughest things to do in the league. That's why, being a point a game player is so highly regarded. To be able to do something like that, you're one of the best players in the league, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. So just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe. Follow us on iTunes and Spotify. Give us a rating on iTunes as well. It's a humongous help to us. All right, let's get into our next topic. We did reference it a little bit earlier. So one thing we want to talk about, Briere, Torts, and Keith Jones have been kind of mentioning this, but it was mentioned in the pregame and the postgame last week that the team hasn't changed their philosophy, and that the winning has not necessarily changed that. We kind of talked about in the trading portion. A lot of the philosophy is not to be going out and adding big contracts, trying to pick up additional assets where it's needed. But I think they're a little bit surprised at the early success, just at the fact that the Flyers are in a definitive playoff position at this point in the season. But I don't think that's really changed anything. I mean, that if you look at the offense or the offseason this year, they did add, but not anything significant at all. They removed assets, and I think we'll see another offseason of probably those type of moves with more young guys coming in. And I think that really is the not changing the philosophy. It's not a cleaning house type of philosophy, and I think that's what they're referring to. And I said it in the preseason, is like, these guys, this is marketing material about rebuilding and tanking, and all that stuff is nonsense. There aren't a ton of options for guys to make. It's about reacting to what's in front of you. And what are you going to do to this team? You're going to rip the guts out of them, even though they're playing well. Majority of the players playing well on this team are under 25 years old. 21 to 26 years old. That's majority of this team. And if you remove Atkinson from this team alone, they're already one of the youngest teams in the league. And if you remove Atkinson, and you remove some other, kind of older players, they're the youngest team in the league. So, I think for the most part, we're going to keep seeing this moving forward. And I think it really just defines what the trade deadline would look like. That if the Flyers are out of a playoff spot, those names we mentioned earlier, they will be up for grabs. Otherwise, I think they stick with it. And then they focus on an off season of either maybe finding some additional young players around the league to bring in, but really focusing on the draft and maybe getting another asset, maybe moving an Atkinson in the offseason, maybe moving Risto in the offseason around the draft. But his value, again, Risto is the one guy I do see that even if the Flyers are in a playoff position and Toronto's offering you a first-round pick, or somebody's offering you a first-round pick for a physical right-handed defenseman who, we know that teams love that for a playoff run, and obviously Walker's out there too. But if you can get rid of Risto's money, that's a lot more tempting because he comes off the books for next year. And I think that's really what it's all about, is replacing some of these guys who are closer to 30 next year. Not so much this year when a team is trying to make a playoff run. What do you think?
Yeah, I think just seeing Tortorella and Briere kind of be lockstep on what they're saying to the media, and like the idea of the team not changing the philosophy and kind of continuing here with this rebuilding philosophy. Not necessarily that it's rebuilding, but everybody's on the same page and knows what the steps forward are going to be for this team to get back to being a perennial contender, playoff team every single year. Where I think if you look at past seasons, right, like you had John Tortorella last season saying, oh yeah, this is a rebuild, and then Chuck Fletcher coming out like 20 minutes later and saying, well, we're only 5 points back in the playoffs, like stuff like that, right? Like it's just, there's a disconnect between the head coach and the front office, and you're not seeing that. And I think that's something that nobody's really pointing out is John Tortorella said, in one of the pressers last week, or post-game pressers, that despite the fact the Flyers are playing well, like the organization isn't changing the philosophy on how they want to build things. And you have Danny Briere pregame with, Jim Jackson and Brian Boucher kind of stating the same thing, that, the philosophy is staying the same. They want to try to build through the draft. They're not going to be making any drastic moves or buying at the deadline because, the team's suddenly a playoff team, but it's more about understanding that, okay, we have the position coming up with this draft with 2 first-round picks. We can add to our draft pool, but we also have a lot of young players coming up that we want to be able to work in and get into the lineup at some point. So I think that is the main thing, that the team is still focused on doing things like that versus like, oh, look, we made the playoffs. Let's go out into free agency and spend a ton of money and lock ourselves into a bunch of contracts that hamstrings us down the line here. I just think it's more of like the organization has a thought process that, okay, instead of like making irrational decisions and making quick decisions, and because we were a playoff team, we need to get right back into it, we're still going to take a measured approach and assess and think, okay, hey, we can sign, a 30 goal scorer or like a really, impact, like top 3 type defenseman this upcoming offseason. Should we do that? Like, does that align with bringing in Matvei Michkov and Cutter Gauthier next year or the year after that if we sign these 30-year-old players? And how good are they going to be, in 3 seasons or 2 seasons when we're trying to, win a Stanley Cup, right? Like, are they still going to be as good? Does it make sense to do that? So I think it's just like not making knee-jerk reaction moves because you're in the moment and, oh, we can get this guy, let's get him, right?
Like trading for Risto when...
Yeah, it was a knee-jerk reaction move because they wanted to get back into the playoff hunt and they thought a defenseman like that could help, do that. I think it's just assessing like, okay, like what are our needs as a team? How can we address those needs without actively hamstringing our cap situation, our contract situation, and still allowing an opportunity for some of our younger players, because the Flyers have a ton of young guys looking to come up in the next few seasons that could, have an impact on their depth, where if you are signing a bunch of free agents and, making a bunch of trades, what happens to those young players? Are they pushed out, right? So that kind of like takes the eye off what you're trying to do with making this, be a younger team as a whole. So the team grows and becomes that perennial playoff team and then eventually perennial cup contender on the same level where you have a bunch of young guys kind of stepping into that together, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what seeing these, Briere himself, in a front office role as a GM and the coach kind of say the same thing, that they're sticking to the same philosophy. I think that's really a good thing to see because if you have a front office that isn't lockstep with, your coach and vice versa, you can kind of see the mess that we saw with Chuck Fletcher, where there really isn't a direction that the team is in and nobody really knows like what the next steps are for the team to actively get better here. So I think the fact that they're just, on the same page, that's really the most important thing for me, versus no matter what they do next. I just think that they need to be consistent in what they're doing, not like, oh, let's make a trade at the draft to, package those 2 first rounders and move up and take, a higher draft pick. And then let's go sign a guy for like, $50 or $60 million who's 31 years old. Like I don't see this front office doing things like that. Whereas the prior front office, it was kind of like, who knows what's happening or what's going to happen or what kind of move is going to come out of the woodwork.
They're going to sign Johnny Gaudreau and then Yeah.
he ends up not playing very well
It
for
was a
Columbus.
smart,
So
yeah, it was a smart move not to bring him in. I mean, we kind of knew that it wasn't the right time for him. All right, our next topic, and I don't want to linger on it too much. I just found it interesting that I'm hearing that there's going to be an NHL expansion in 2026, which would be very strange to me, considering there are 32 teams, and now they want to go to 33, which means you'd have to go to 34 after
yeah,
that, which I think would make them the biggest league in at
professional
least North,
sports.
yeah, in
Yeah.
professional sports. Now they've hit two home runs with Seattle and Vegas back to back, but it's a little strange. Anything?
Personally, I think the league's already diluted enough in terms of the talent. Like, personally, I didn't want the expansion to go to 32 teams. I thought it was a mistake. If you look at the money that they're making, obviously it's not a mistake, but look at the talent across the league. And I think you suffer there from a product perspective if you add in
Potential,
an
yeah.
if you add in two other teams and you get to 34 teams, that means a lot of guys that are AHLers now will be in the NHL once these two teams make it in, right? That's just the nature of the business. And then from that point, are you watering down your product where you're not having the best players play the best players anymore because you just influx the whole, amount of AHL guys or guys that are in other professional leagues across the world? Like, does that make the NHL a worse league? Does it make the viewing experience for the fan worse? I mean, it's hard to know right now because we actively can't see it in front of us to understand how it would be. Maybe, adding two extra teams makes it more competitive. Who knows, right? Because you add Seattle, you add Vegas, and Vegas is obviously a cup winner and has been one of the most competitive teams since they've come in. And Seattle obviously isn't doing well this year. In their first season, they didn't do well, but last season they made the playoffs. So it's hard to tell. I just think you dilute the skill in the league when you bring in extra teams like that.
I,
Um, and
oh,
my
sorry.
only thought too is like, where are you putting the teams? Because I
That's
I, I know for a fact they're not going to put one in Canada because they're just not going to. Bettman isn't a fan of that. It would
yeah.
make sense to put one in Canada because they'd sell out every single game, either in Quebec or you get a team in Hamilton, just like an hour north of Toronto here. Trust me, fans will go. They'll go to the game. You'll sell out. But if you put the team in Atlanta, which hasn't worked twice already with the Atlanta Flames and the Thrashers, like third time's a charm. I don't think so. It hasn't worked two times. Like
Right.
you're just doing things for the sake of doing it. And like, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah.
Like, why would you put another team in Atlanta? Maybe Houston can work, but like we already see, like, look at Dallas, right? Like when Dallas Stars are a bad team, is their arena full? No. When they're a
You
good team, it's full. But like, is Houston going to be good?
yeah.
Right? Like to start off. So I don't know.
I
I think
think
you might just bring two teams in that end up having attendance issues.
yeah, potentially. That's definitely there, and I think the team would probably or the league would get younger. To your point, I think you'd see more players making the NHL early, just because they don't want to bring in AHL guys, or to say NHL, yeah, making the NHL early because they don't want to bring in AHL guys as much because of their talent difference. But I don't like it. I think 32 teams is a really good number, and I think they should stick at that. I think there is still more talent out there around the world, and that's what you'd end up doing is probably bringing guys over from Europe as well. But I don't know. I'm just I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. I was very surprised to see it. You know, money wise, it might, but I think the league is growing in the right direction right now. I don't know if
Yeah.
bringing another team and going through
And
another expansion draft is something we really want to
with
see.
32 teams now, it's literally the perfect scenario, right? Like you always had those 16 teams making it in. And before it wasn't like a half where half makes it, half
Also,
misses.
what do you do with the divisions? Even if you add two teams, you know,
Yeah, that
how do
too.
the
I mean,
divisions work? That's what I mean. It's like I
it's
don't
a
like
whole it's a
you have
whole
to
headache.
restructure the divisions.
It's a whole headache for the NHL. And I think right now, like things are growing for them and adding another two teams is just going to mess with the formula that people seem to like right now with the wild cards and things like
Yeah.
that. So like, why mess with something that's working? Though the NHL doesn't seem to care, to be honest, with stuff like that. They'll just rearrange their divisions every like 3-4 seasons at this point. That's what it looks
Yeah.
like to me, right? Like, but I think consistency is key if you want to grow the game more. Keeping
Yeah.
things the same, like sometimes reinventing the wheel just for the sake of doing it actually causes more issues than it
Yeah.
solves. So
Well, we'll see if it actually happens. I'm skeptical.
it's an interesting point though to bring up.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next topic. So we'll get into the Phantoms and the prospect, and we'll end on that. So Phantoms are playing right now. I just want to point out that Emil Andre scored the first goal of the game for the Phantoms, so good to see him getting on the scoreboard. And then there's injury updates for them. And I added this stuff while we were recording, Vasili, so it's not on our log here, but just saw that Helge Grans is going to be out long term. He has a broken hand that requires surgery, so that sounds like maybe 2 months there. That's kind of my guess on the date. But Tanner Lazinski is back. Adam Brooks is back, and Brooks is a big part of the Phantoms. He was played a huge role for them last year, and he hasn't played a game yet this season. So that's really nice to see him back. Brett Gardner is back from injury, and Victor Mete. So a bunch of big boosts for them. They are tied 1-1. They scored and then gave up a goal like a couple minutes later. But good to see. Also want to put up that Sammy Tuamala is still putting up points, even when Lazinski was out and Uli Lickshell was with the Flyers. He still had an assist the other night. And Zaid Wisdom scored his first goal of the season, finally. Teddy bear drop, which I still don't know exactly what that means. Outside of the Bears going everywhere when he scored. But still, good to see Zaid Wisdom get on the scoreboard finally. He's been very silent in that department offensively. What do you think about the Phantoms, and what do you think about the return of the injuries?
Well, I think the injury stuff's definitely really good because obviously without Lazinski and without Brooks, you're effectively missing your top two centers. So
Yep.
for the Phantoms to get those guys back,
And they don't have Lixell either.
yeah, that's only going to help them and the way they're playing. I think in general, like the Phantoms, correct me if I'm wrong, Yariv, but I think they've been playing a lot better as of late versus the beginning of the year. I think it's kind of been almost a constant progression. So I think that's a good thing to see from them. And hopefully they can continue to play well and strive toward a playoff spot. Because I think after making the playoffs last season, anything else would be a failure, right? And
Agreed.
maybe that has you kind of questioning Ian LaPerriere's status with the team going forward. Because I think the depth this year on the fans even surpasses that of last season's, especially adding in a Lazinski and an Allison to the mix. Like they should be a playoff team in the AHL, even with some defensemen they've added to here. So I think that, it's good to see them starting to play a little better. And obviously for Wisdom to score, that's just in general, you never want to go goalless this long. So first confidence, hopefully that kind of, you start seeing his game raise back to that level that we saw, in training camp and some preseason games where he was the Flyers, like one of their best players. And the teddy bear drop, I believe, Yariv, is just like it's like a charity event type of thing. So I think they raise
Is it
money.
like the first goal that scored? Is that what it
Yeah,
is?
something like that. And they drop them all. And I think it's all for
Mhm.
charity. So it's like really good cause, obviously.
So let me just read the lines out for tonight. So Adam Brooks is actually playing left wing, stepping in for Ule Lickshell, who's still with the Flyers. So he's playing with Lazinski and Tuamala. So again, that top line persists. And then it's Wilson with Denoye and Maruti. And then third line is Avon, Rhett Gardner, Wade Allison. Fourth line, Belleve, Gauthier, Gocher. I don't even know how to say his name. I assume it's Gauthier. And Zaid Wisdom on the fourth line.
Okay.
Then Andre is playing with Karashik, which is a little surprising, but he's stepping into the top pairing with Andre. I guess he's shown some good signs down there. Mete is playing with Adard, and Yinning is playing with Ethan Sansom. So it's good to see. And then Felix Sandstrom is in net tonight as well.
That's interesting about Brooks on the wing, but I guess they want to obviously keep Desnoyers in the top two center role, which makes sense. You're trying to develop him. Brooks, you kind of know, is an AHL guy at this point, so yeah. I understand that, especially with Lixell out.
They want a top line, right?
Exactly.
I assume he's going to move back in the middle when Lixell gets back.
Maybe on that third line, yeah.
Yeah, maybe Rhett Gardner will move down to the fourth line at that point. Yeah, I'm not sure. All right, prospect wise. So Cutter Gauthier had a 3-point night the other night. He had a goal and 2 assists. Big night for him. He's still continuing. He's way over a point a game at this point. He just keeps getting better. And I don't think, was it officially announced, the World Junior Championship for him?
No, they're still doing the the showcase camps and stuff, like the camps for the rosters right now. But like he's gonna make the US team.
Yeah, he's a shoe-in.
He's a lock, obviously. really the interesting thing for me for Gauthier now, I think, because you kind of see and know what he can do at the college level, right? Like he's basically a goal a game guy at the college
I can't
level,
wait to see him
over
here.
over a point a game. I'm interested now. Just does he come to the Flyers right at the end of the season, or is BC such a good team here that they end up going to the finals of the Frozen Four or something, and there's not a chance for that, right?
And
I'm interested because the Flyers are going to be looking like they're a competitive team, obviously. Like if they continue this play, they're going to be in that,
they're in the
playoff.
playoffs. He's going to
Yeah,
join them.
right. So like, is he going to finally get, or is he not finally, but is he going to, his first taste of NHL action, is it going to be playoff action, right?
That would
That
be
would be
wild.
interesting. It might happen, right? It happened
It
for
could
Cale
definitely.
Makar a few
Yeah.
seasons ago. So I just wonder what that'll be like. And I mean, once he comes over, is Frost officially like the odd man out, right? Because I wonder what happens. I think they're going to try to play him at center, and if that's the case, like I can't see them taking
That's
Keith out. So
this is why I think that Morgan Frost is going to be traded. At this point, I think they're going to be looking to move him regardless of where they are. Uh, just because of his usage and
you got to
again,
make
he's
room for Cutter at some point.
yeah,
So
and he's not putting up numbers, so it's not going to sell Tortorella or Jones on his
well, they wanted to see point a game
his
from
future.
him if they were going to keep him. I think that's what they were kind of looking
Uh,
for
At
around
least
that.
at least half a point a game, and he's not
Yeah,
doing that right now. And he's getting opportunities right now, and he's not putting up
he's on
numbers.
the
And
first power
he
play.
hasn't
He's
played
getting
poorly though.
no, he
He's had some
hasn't.
good moves. So, but
Sucks to see, but that's just the nature of what it is, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah. And then this happened while we started recording. So Oliver Bonk has made Team Canada.
awesome.
Denver Barkey has not. A little
He
surprised about
he
Barkey.
because yeah, he had the 1 goal, 1 assist in I think one of the games in the camp there. But usually Canada's a lot deeper at forward than they are at defense,
Yes.
so I
And they're
think it makes
also
sense.
he's also undersized. He's not going to play a bottom six role for them, so he's got to be in the top nine.
Yeah.
Definitively. So it's a shame, but he'll have the
Chip on the
opportunity next
shoulder,
year.
chip
Yeah,
on the shoulder type thing, right? Where like I think that probably motivates him to play even better down the line here and probably make the team next year. So
yeah, yeah. And I think he's got another year in juniors left in him anyway. At this
definitely, yeah.
point, that I'll come to the Phantoms. Alex Yernik also was selected by Team Slovakia, which is not surprising just because he's
No.
been one of the better players, especially in his age group. So it's exciting that we'll have at least Yernik, Cutter Gauthier, and
See,
Oliver Bonk.
Ciernik will be really interesting because he's in a men's league and has been playing in a men's
Yes.
league for a couple seasons, as Steve said. So I'm kind of wondering, like, he goes to the World Juniors amongst his age group, and if he just is like, yeah, I'm tearing it up here.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what happens because he's going to be playing against probably worse competition than he does regularly. So
Yes. I'm excited to see what he can bring too, because he's a scorer, so he's going to play a
yeah,
top six role for them. All right, and the last one is Matvey Michkov. So he missed the All Star game due to illness. Apparently, he has pneumonia. That's what I read online. I don't know, but that also tells me that he was sick while putting up points. So just
I
put
think
that
he's been
together.
recovering. Like he should be back soon. That's something that
Yeah,
I
yeah,
saw.
yeah.
So
I'm sure he will be. But obviously he had severe cold. And he was still putting up points because he clearly was battling it because he was sick earlier, came back, and
yeah.
then, again, still putting up points while having pneumonia, which is crazy.
That's unfortunate, but like I'm happy that Sochi's taking kind of the cautious approach because the last thing you want to do when you have pneumoni is be on the ice playing
Right.
hockey. It's
Yeah, yeah.
probably not gonna help you
Right. That's
heal
that was
very
my
well. So
that was my thought as well.
just in a cold,
Um,
damp rink, like that's the worst place, and you're
to
sweating.
yeah,
Like
it's
not
not a
a
good
recipe for
combination.
success at all.
Yeah. But the most interesting thing about him is so Jonesy was being interviewed, I think it was by Denver media,
Yeah,
and they asked him about Matvey Michkov, and you know, and I just thought it was really interesting because she asked, could Matvey come over next year? And his response was, "There's always a chance because the plan hasn't changed, but there's always a chance." And that goes back to what I was saying, what we were talking about, the two of us, is that every season they will be trying to bring him over here.
yeah.
They obviously can't say anything publicly, but it does kind of align that they would love to get him over here next year, along with Cutter Gauthier, and have both those rookies playing in this team. And that gives you a lot more flexibility with players that you can move. And, again, if you're adding Michkov and Gauthier, you can afford to move a couple forwards, open up some cap space, and, get some assets back and then help shore up that D. Because, again, I believe they're going to be looking for a top D man when it becomes available. And I just think it's really interesting. He says that there's a chance, and they clearly are keeping such a tight eye on this kid as they should
Yeah.
be. But it's exciting. I love that he said, he didn't he could have given a more non-answer, and he
Yeah.
didn't.
Well, I think it's definitely interesting for him to say there's a chance. And then the more interesting part, like you alluded to, is just the team is obviously keeping a very close eye on him. Point or case in point, like John Tortorella mentioning him as
Right.
the Mad Russian. Like John Tortorella doesn't look at prospects or really care about prospects until
Ever.
they reach him. So the fact that he's paying attention to Michkov, it just shows like the special player that he is. For excuse me, for me it's going to be really interesting just to see what the relationship is like between him and Ska. Like I think that is going to determine what happens next, right? Like if it's so kind of battered and bruised, that relationship between Michkov and Ska and Rottenberg, because Rottenberg's going to be the head coach there for a while, right? Like if there's some sort of irreparable relationship there between those two, like is Ska just gonna like wanna, send him away again next season? Are they even gonna play him, even though he's one of the top scorers in the KHL? Like, who knows, right? So if it's another season of having to go through the same bullshit like that with Ska, and then having to get loaned out again, like I think Michkov will want to leave himself just because he's not being treated as the talent that he is, even in his own country, in his home country, right? Like because you look at it this way, like is he still a top 10? I don't know now with the pneumonia if he's still top 10 in KHL scoring, Michkov, but like before all this he was. And the fact that, he's not a player that Scott kept is kind of insane to me. So maybe, he looks at it and says, look at this, like I played, really well in the preseason. I ended up getting loaned out because they didn't believe that I could play well in the regular season. Then I go and almost put up a point a game and is like a top scorer in a men's league. Like, no, I don't want to go back to Ska. They disrespected me. So like, I kind of wonder what happens there, like with the relationship. And I think if it's really a bad one, you see him come over early next season. But obviously it depends. Maybe it's all water under the bridge and it's all just like politics because he's a younger player. Maybe he understands that all. I just am not sure how it will work for him with Ska going forward. I think that's really the key here, right? Like, what do they plan to do with him next year? Does he have a definitive, spot in the top 6? If so, then he'll probably stay. But if it's all up in the air, he's probably thinking to himself, well, I can go play in the NHL right now and be in a top 6 where I can't even do it in the KHL. So what's
Yeah.
the benefit for him to stay, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm trying to look this up. Hold on one second. Give me 1 second here before we end this.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, so I'm looking. Oh, what happened to all my screens? There we go. I'm looking at his contract.
Okay.
And I like literally just thought to do this. I wish I would have thought to do it earlier. Um, and he gets paid. So he signed a 5-year deal, and for the
That's a couple of
next,
years ago, right?
yeah. So year one, and again, this is in rubles, Russian currency. 2.5 million in rubles first year. Second year was 10 million. Third year was 7.5 million. Fourth year 12 point. So right now it's 7.5 million. Then next year 12.5 million, and then the last year 15 million. But the conversion rate of rubles to dollars is like essentially a penny per it's like a little over a penny. So if I'm doing that right, so realistically it's nowhere near the amount of money. It's like it's in the low
Well, just
millions.
for like just to let the listeners know, like 2 million rubles is 22,000 US dollars.
There you go. So,
So
and
yeah.
here the breakdown for the last 2 years is he'll be getting just under $300,000 US dollars next year, and then the following year, like $350,000 per
So it's
season.
pretty minimal for US dollars versus what
Right.
you're buying out,
And
right?
that's kind of like, while that is a substantial amount of money for somebody who lives in Russia, again, you throw $5 million at the team to buy Michkov's contract out. That's pretty doable. And on
And
jerseys
they're probably into it.
alone,
They're probably into it too.
especially if he doesn't want to
Ska,
stay.
yes, exactly. Especially if the relationship is kind of torn, like we've said here, right? And they can get money out of it and sign a player that, is going to be a guy that's going to stay in the KHL with them on their team. So who knows what's going to happen, but it's definitely going to be something everyone's keeping an eye on. We certainly will be. So,
Yeah. And wow, I just realized that he signed that contract when he was 15
yep,
or 16.
that's
16.
not surprising because a lot of the like European hockey clubs, like it's similar to soccer, right? Where you're signing guys very young, like in a development
Yeah.
type of age. Like there's not really a draft or anything there. So
Well, I'll tell you, man, it makes me realize that, that buyout's a lot more realistic. So
well,
yeah,
yeah,
it comes out to be $1.6 million for 15 million rubles or
okay.
rubles. So that, if you're
It's a
really
fourth
looking at,
line player for the Flyers, really.
right. So if you're really looking at it and you want to buy out those 2 years of those contracts, you give them double, try to offer them that.
Yeah,
Again, on jersey sales alone, he would make that money back. Like,
yeah.
we see the attention he gets just when we make a Michkov video. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
maybe even attendance alone, right? Like the Flyers, they're doing well this season, but there's certain games they're not selling out. Like if you have Mitchkov and
attendance
yeah,
and Gautier, and you bring in
yeah,
both of those names at once, you want to talk about filling up your building. And you look at their success this year, and then you bring in two of the best prospects in the world, one of which is a generational talent. I mean, you're talking about being in the news all the time.
yeah,
Um,
for definitely right. Like the hockey
TV
media will be
revenue,
talking about the Flyers a lot more often if those two guys are on the radar.
Bedard versus Michkov matchups on television.
All that stuff. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
like you're talking about you're talking about making a lot of money. So, and Russia will know that. So, they'll want a pretty penny to buy out that contract, but I think it's doable. I think it's realistic, and I think the Flyers will look to explore it this offseason. And again, that brings them more flexibility of what they can do with their current roster players, and they can let go of some of the guys who are in their top six potentially or in their top nine, right? And they could go with a very young lineup of, with Brink and Forrester and Gautier and Michkov, with the corner pieces of the other guys around them of essentially Couturier and TK and Farabee and, Tippett and maybe Frost, Cates, Lawton, Hathaway. You know, Again, Delorier will be here, but who says he's going to make the lineup too? Who knows? But just something to think about. But at least it makes me realize that last year of the contract, they'll definitely be trying to buy that out. I don't know about this off season; they might just go with just Cutter. But for sure, that final year they'll be trying to buy that $1.6 million contract out. All right, dude. Another good episode. Just want to remind everybody to please like, subscribe, share, hit the bell. Again, give us a rating on iTunes, follow us on Spotify. All of that is a humongous help. You guys have been amazing, and the feedback from the last episode was fantastic, and we love it. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Vasili, anything you want to leave our audience with?
We'll be having an article paired with this tomorrow. So everybody, or as you're listening to this, check it out on flyersnittygritty.com, and then looking to have some articles this weekend just surrounding some of the interesting topics around the team. So keep an eye out for that, and keep an eye out for all the written content on Flyers Nitty Gritty. The team does an awesome job, and we're happy that you all are reading our stuff.
Yeah, we love you guys. Thank you all so much. And yeah, I always say it in different order, but again, we love you guys, and remember, always stay gritty.